We were leaning towards one another, straining to listen. A small group in the back of the prison chapel at the Washington State Reformatory. It had been another one of our Jesuit Restorative Justice Initiative retreats, and our small group had been deeply moving and powerful that day. There had been great trust, and so stories of trauma and abuse, mistakes and regret, addiction, mental illness, and rage tumbled out with humility and authenticity from men with a deep desire to be healed and to receive and live out the love of God. Father Peter Ely, an 82-year-old Jesuit from Seattle University, whom many of us knew and loved, had wanted to be part of our JRJI retreat team and was with us for the first time. I was so blessed that he was in my small group. Also in my small group is a man I'll call Richard. Richard was an older gentleman who had been incarcerated late in life. He shared how it had terrified him to go to prison and how relieved he was when he was blessed with a wonderful cellie, the prison term for a cellmate. His young cellie was friendly and generous, helped him learn the ropes of prison life, and together, they often broke the bread of shared food from the prison commissary. They also opened their Bibles and shared the Word of God, and this gave Richard great comfort. What he didn't know was that his cellmate had a severe mental illness and a long history of extreme violence. One day, his cellmate awoke a changed man and beat Richard to within an inch of his life. He was taken out on a stretcher and sustained serious head trauma and neurological damage. Though he would never fully heal, when he was released from the hospital, he was moved from Walla Walla and sent to Washington State Reformatory for a fresh start and hopefully more safety. It was his second retreat with us, and he gripped his Bible characteristically on his lap. Because of his neurological damage, words came slowly and quietly, and he gestured with permanently trembling hands. During our last small group that day, I suggested to the men that we go around just one more time and share any thoughts or gratitudes before rejoining the large group for our closing ritual. When it became Father Peter's turn to speak, to my surprise, he began to weep. And he said, "Last night I was so angry with myself for saying yes to Jennifer to help out on this retreat. My heart has been out of rhythm for the last few months. I fell recently, went to the hospital, and my heart is still not in rhythm, and it's very frightening. I just didn't want to come. I felt angry, not just at myself, but at Jennifer too, for getting me into this whole thing." Then he chuckled a bit and looked at me and went on. "I was going to call her last night and tell her, but something gave me pause, and so I decided to sleep on it and call her in the morning. I'm so glad I waited. Surprisingly, I woke up feeling refreshed, so here I am. And I have to tell you," and then he wept some more, trying to control himself, "that being with you today, my heart has been back in rhythm all day. I'm a Jesuit priest. I'm supposed to minister to others, and yet today I listened to you share so vulnerably and so honestly your challenges, the terrible things you've suffered, your mistakes, your anger. And I've also watched you console each other with kindness and understanding. I stand in awe and admiration. I myself struggle with vulnerability. I struggle with accepting at times that I can be angry. I'm moved by you. I admire you. I can't wait to come back and learn more from you. I'm so looking forward to more retreats, and I'm so glad I came today." When Father Peter finished speaking, Richard, who was sitting next to him, raised a trembling hand, and leaning towards Father Peter, he put it on his shoulder and said, "Oh, bless your heart, Father, bless your heart." And around the circle, every other arm lifted, with hands extended towards Father Peter as a chorus of voices said, "Yes, bless your heart, Father, bless your heart." I have no doubt that the men and I anticipated joyfully many more retreats with dear Father Peter, and I went home with a heart full of gratitude that he wanted to join our team. I could never have imagined that exactly 8 weeks later, on Holy Saturday, Father Peter's heart arrhythmia would assert itself again, taking him home to God when, at the end of a walk, he collapsed to the ground. I was heartbroken when I heard the news, but one of the first consoling thoughts I had was a memory of that day and that group blessing. Priests give blessings all the time, but I suspect they rarely receive them in a formal way. Was that the final blessing that Father Peter would receive before going home to God? I'll never know, but I suspect it was. In our tender small group and our cast of broken and imperfect characters, including Father Peter and me, did we that day experience the work to which St. James exhorts us in the second reading? For what are works? All too often, I suspect we can unconsciously treat works as efforts that we make, as things that we do to earn the love of God and be good people. But what if the work of which St. James speaks is an entirely different kind of work? What if the work of our lives is to grow more and more available and open to God's love so that we can receive it and become it? And all our other works, like feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, flow from that, from us being a living manifestation of God's love. I believe that the blessings we shared that day were a tangible experience of what it looks like when our work is becoming God's love for one another. Our small group experience was beautifully and powerfully mutual. First, Father Peter blessed the men by holding up a mirror, showing them their capacity to inspire and teach and their true identity as beloved sons of God. But in return, didn't they also bless Father Peter and hold up a mirror to him, revealing his belovedness and how his humility, his kindness, and his respect were powerful medicines? The experience that day captured the essence of our ministry at JRJI Northwest, a ministry of kinship in which we walk in relationships of mutuality with children of God who happen to be behind bars. Both JRJI team members and the folks on the inside are beloved and have the capacity to bless. Both our team members and those behind bars are also broken and in need of others. In our walk together, we are each transformed and are strengthened in our desire to more fully become living manifestations of God's love. When we go behind the walls, we don't bring anything that isn't already there. God's love is and always has been present behind the walls. We go to recognize it, point at it, affirm it, and help those who come to our retreats see it as well as they do for us. Reminds me of my own need for an annual retreat and spiritual direction, because at times I become so blind to the ways that God walks with me and shows up in the ordinary moments of my days. But with all that being said, and a story of such a gracious moment, what are we to make of the challenging readings this weekend, and how do they relate? That familiar piece from Isaiah of the suffering servant, abused and buffeted by spitting and insults. The servant who clings to the Lord with tenacious trust. Or that painful gospel story in the rebuke from Jesus to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." The readings today remind me that not every moment of following Jesus is bathed in glory and light, like that moment with Father Peter and Richard and the men. Those moments are a grace and a gift, a tonic, a medicine that I cherish and remember and hold on to for strength. But other moments of following Jesus aren't as apparently grace-filled and lovely. The reading from Isaiah confronts me with a question. How am I going to handle the unavoidable and inevitable sufferings, betrayals, and even humiliations of my life? Will I become bitter and resentful, perhaps violent? Or will I cling to the trust that God, who is my help, never leaves or fails me? Or perhaps will I, like Peter in our gospel today, try to hide in denial, closing my eyes and ears to the inevitable sufferings and pains of life, and rush in with empty words to fix the unfixable? In his moment of fleeing so quickly from the truth of Jesus' words, Peter abandoned Jesus, leaving him alone, and he missed an opportunity to stand with Jesus in simple, powerless, and silent solidarity. Our kin behind bars rarely need grand preaching or specific words from us, but instead find healing in simple, humble, and authentic solidarity, exactly the kind that they received from Father Peter. The women and men I've met behind bars, who may for a time have lost their way and perhaps have done some terrible things, but the ones we meet in our JRJI programs tend to be courageous souls, well aware that out here on the outside, most of society sees them as beyond redemption. They know someday when they're released, they'll have to face buffets and spitting of some kind. Nevertheless, they want to live transformed and loving lives, giving back to the communities where they once caused harm. I still feel frequently sad that Father Peter passed far too soon for those of us who loved him. But what I hold on to is how exquisitely beautiful it was to watch an 82-year-old Jesuit shower grace so liberally and leave something indestructible behind. It was as though he'd made so much space in his heart for God that God had taken up full residence there. The men could feel it, I could feel it. And perhaps when God so fully occupies you, it's time to go home. May we too trust and know that we can grow in our capacity to receive the very love of God into our being. And despite trials, we too can become the work. We too can become living manifestations of God's love for a world that desperately needs it.